Okay, welcome everybody to Saratoga Whiskey Club tasting number 136. We keep plugging right along. We've done a lot this year. We've done a ton in the past 3 years. COVID kind of made us do a lot more tastings, and we haven't really stopped. So there was a benefit to the pandemic, I guess. We tried a lot more whiskey. Super excited to have Adam and Nora here with us tonight. From Lost Lantern. There's been a ton of buzz over the last, I want to say, year about Lost Lantern. Holly and I have been super excited to taste their products. I know back quite a while ago, I found a bottle in Kentucky of one of their single malts from Santa Fe Spirits, brought it back. We had it in a club tasting. And that was our first introduction to Lost Lantern. I was like, okay, this is really cool.
I may have stalked and harassed Nora about getting her stuff into the shop many months ago. So thank you for still being friends with us.
So we're going to talk about a lot of things tonight. I know a lot of people are new to our tastings here tonight. So we're going to kind of do a little bit of 101, but then also get a little detailed on some of these bottles here tonight. They know a ton. So feel free to ask them questions as we go along. We're trying tonight the 5 that are available in New York State. We thought that would be the best way to kind of introduce their products. But yeah, I'm going to get out of the way. And I'm going to sit over there and I'm going to enjoy watching. If there are questions in the chat room, I'll let you guys know, and we'll go from there. And there are some palate cleansers on the table: cucumbers, dark chocolate, it's 85% dark chocolate, and just some simple crackers. Nothing too crazy tonight. Just clean palate, drink water, clean your palates in between each of these, because there's lots of really amazing flavors in all of these bottles. So, all right.
Yeah, and a lot of them are cast strength or close to cast strength. So you're also welcome to add water, spit, not drink all of it, whatever feels good to you.
Oh, we don't have spit on it.
Spit on your neighbor.
Well, thanks to Holly and Charles for having us.
Yeah.
All of you here. We're really excited to talk about these whiskeys.
Really excited to be here. We're based in Vermont. Drove down here for this. Luckily, we were not affected by the floods. But there's
a reason why the bourbons are not yet in the store, because we couldn't get them out of Vermont for a little bit.
Although they should be here hopefully the next week or two.
Yeah.
But yeah, we are Adam and Nora, the co-founders of Lost Lantern, and Lost Lantern is an independent bottler of American whiskey.
I'm sorry, I've been watching the Thin Man series. Your name really should be Nick.
So the rest of this tasting, Nick and Nora.
Also, questions as we talk, raise your hand, just like that. Like nerdy questions, not so nerdy questions.
Silly questions.
Silly questions, yeah. So we are one of the first independent bottlers of American whiskey. And how many of you are somewhat familiar with independent bottlers from the Scotch world? Cool. So what an independent bottler is a company that doesn't make whiskey on their own. We are not a distillery. We never will be. Instead, we buy whiskey from small distilleries all around the United States. But the idea is really to help people discover distilleries and whiskeys they wouldn't otherwise know about. So we're totally transparent about the fact that we're sourcing whiskey and about exactly where that whiskey comes from. In fact, we want to tell you where it comes from so that you can get excited about that place too. Be like, oh, there's this great Texas distillery that I haven't had before, haven't seen the side of it. Maybe I should seek them out too. And this is based on a rich tradition from the Scotch world that's existed for almost 200 years. We were actually in Scotland a couple of weeks ago, went to the shop of one of them called Cadenhead, that's been, I think, been in the same spot for about 170 years or so. And in Scotland, these companies would buy whiskey from distilleries all around Scotland, put it out, say where it came from, and it was one of the only ways that you could get single malts from smaller distilleries in Scotland, places besides Macallan and Lefroy. And sometimes there's a way you could get unusual things from distilleries that people knew really well, something that would otherwise never come out under their own brand.
Like an unpeated Lefroy.
Yeah. And for us, it seemed that there was a natural space for this in the American whiskey world that didn't exist and until relatively recently couldn't have existed. And But that's a good way to get into our background. So I want to talk a little bit about
Yeah.
that.
So we both come from the whiskey industry. I was sales manager at Astor Wines and Spirits in New York for a number of years, and Adam wrote for Whiskey Advocate. So
Senior whiskey specialist there,
Yeah.
writing about and reviewing whiskeys from all around the United States.
So this is actually birthed from many years of conversations about how we wanted to exist, how we drank so many whiskeys from Scotch IBs, and we really needed that voice in American whiskey, someone to go out and find all of the distilleries in the U.S. Because in the U.S. there are so many places that are regionally focused. Some of the whiskeys that you'll have here, like Frey Ranch, to the best of our knowledge, they don't get to New York. So, but California gets them and Nevada gets them. So we needed someone to go to those places and figure out what was worth drinking and not have to go and find those regional things yourself. There are over 2,000 distilleries now. We can barely keep up. He's on the road all the time. But we, even working at Astor and Whiskey Advocate, we didn't know what was happening all over the country. So we spent years being like, where is the IB? And that eventually morphed to, fine, we'll go do it. So we actually went on an 8-month road trip. We quit our jobs, we put everything in storage, went on an 8-month road trip because we had this idea. But then we needed to see if anyone was going to sell us whiskey. Because it could be a great idea, but if everyone tells us to leave, then it didn't matter. But it really helped that people knew him. He had written about these distilleries for a long time. They knew Astor. They understood that we had really trained palates. So it actually ended up being a relatively easy conversation because our job is to talk about why they are awesome. So generally, if you come in and say, I want to buy this, I want to put you on a pedestal, that leads to a very positive interaction.
For instance, one of the last whiskey we'll taste tonight is from a distillery called Whiskey Del Bac in Arizona that many of you may not have had before. And we really hope you like our version, and we hope that you will also use that to discover some of their own whiskeys, which are also in the shop.
We know that Charles and Holly have 2 whiskeys for them here as well.
So for us, it's all about shining light on these distilleries and people otherwise wouldn't be able to get their hands on or wouldn't necessarily think to try. And we're going to try to keep the intro spiel pretty short so we can get to the fun part of tasting whiskeys. Is there anything else we need to go over before we get into it?
So we have 3 different, we call them series of products. We're going to taste 2 of the 3 series. We do what we call blend series, which are blends of whiskey from multiple distilleries, which for us are really showing you what the landscape is like. We have an American single malt and we have bourbon blend of that style. So it gives you a sense of what's being done across the country in a really unique way that you wouldn't see without having those distilleries combined. Single distillery series, which is a mini blend from a single distillery. So it's the Lost Lantern perspective on that distillery. We pull from for all of this, we pull from their mature stock. But that's a way for us to shine a light on a different side of a distillery that even, I know some of you know about, but our Gentle Giant single distillery series tastes very different from what you have otherwise. And the last thing which we don't have tonight is we do single casks. We do a range of single casks from distilleries all over the country. We've worked with 28 as of next week. We'll release single casks from 28 distilleries all across
17 or 18 states, I think.
And how long have you been doing this?
We started releasing in 2020. In the middle of the pandemic. Luckily, we went on a road trip in 2018, so we did not get messed up. But since then, we're constantly going back out because the beauty and the curse for him with his sourcing job, because he's the head of sourcing at Lost Lantern, is that there are constantly new great distilleries coming up. So about every couple of years, you have to go back to a place that you've already been.
That, and we decided early on that we would never work with a distillery unless we had visited them in person. So every distillery here we have been to often multiple times, so we can get a sense of not just what style of whiskey they're making and how they're making it, but whether they have something unique to say and add to the whiskey conversation, and also who they are as people, if they have an interesting story, if they're people that we want to work with and tell other people about.
Because when we put something into a bottle and say this is worth drinking, we want to be able to tell you all the ways that it is worth drinking. Any questions? Things that you two would like us to say before we... Yeah, go ahead.
Is it just whiskey for you guys?
It's just whiskey and just American whiskey for us for now.
It's a good point. We work with all styles of American whiskey. We only have bourbon and single malt tonight, but we also do rye, we've done wheat whiskey, we've done corn whiskey. This guy is trying to move into apple brandy, but that's not going to happen for a little bit.
She won't like me, but we're going to do one of these days.
We will eventually. There's so much whiskey being made that we want to stay focused.
And I think you explained to us that there are a lot of times a part of the blends, the actual distilleries themselves. Maybe not always, and maybe each one will be a different process, but the relationships that you have with them, because of Vatted malt, I mean, and to list their name on a Vatted malt, that's not normal.
It's not very Scottish.
Yeah, well, I probably just am stealing the thunder for the Vatted malt, but
yeah, actually, everything except for the Far-Flung Bourbon, we made collaboratively with the distillery. So these are all the single casks. We go there and we talk to them, and then they send us samples and we put them through a pretty intense sensory analysis. But a lot of the stuff that we do is collaborative because that's important for us to plug into what they do. But also it means selfishly that we get access to some really cool barrels if we go down there and we work with them directly.
Yeah. I think that is a good segue to start talking about the first whiskey that we did.
glasses too, right?
We don't have anything in this. It's also fun.
Running short.
We've also tasted these whiskeys, Jeff.
Well, you could pour something else too, but
Yeah, these are all things.
these are all for you.
So the first one we're gonna do is the American Vatted Malt. You can find it on the tasting menu. I think it's bottom left. And we're not going by proof, we're just going by flavor. We've done this enough times. We'll bounce a little bit, but this is how we should. Everything tastes nice. So American Vatted Malt. We named it this because the Scotch tradition, or what is now called blended malt, was originally called a vatted malt. It means that it is a blend made entirely of single malts. So when we launched Lost Lantern, this was actually the first whiskey that we put out. We wanted to tip our hats to Scottish tradition. So do a blend of single malts called American Vatted Malt for the super whiskey nerds to know that that is coming straight from that tradition, but is an American whiskey.
So as Nora said, this is a blend of American single malt, which means it's made from 100% malted barley, made at just one single distillery. But this brings together those single malts from 6 different distilleries. And this one we did actually, as Holly was saying, create collaboratively. We got the distillers and blenders from all 6 distilleries in a room together with us to put together this blend that we really wanted to reflect the landscape of American single malt, which is a very new style of whiskey in the US, but a long tradition from around the world. So one of our rules for tastings is that we're not going to give you our tasting notes of what we think it tastes like, because you can all do that on your own. We'll tell you more about how it came to be and what went into it, but not about the flavors. But this includes whiskey from Washington, Oregon, New Mexico, Texas, Virginia, and Massachusetts. All the distillery names are listed right on the label, and I can rattle them off too, but don't want to bore you too much. But for us, what we really wanted to do was, we saw all these distilleries were making amazing whiskey that reflected the sense of place of where they were, but wanted to see what it would look like if you started to bring those flavors together. For those of you who know Scotch really well, there are amazing single malts from Islay that have a ton of peat and iodine influence, and those are great on their own, but they're also great as a component of with other whiskeys from other parts of Scotland blended together. And then when you're looking at the United States, a country that is many, many times the size of Scotland, Texas alone is 9 times bigger than Scotland. There's so much diversity in climate and terrain and the ways that whiskey can be made. So this whiskey includes a wide variety of different styles. It includes some from Nantucket off Massachusetts that are very similar to Scotch. It also includes some from the Pacific Northwest that were created by brewers and our distilleries that are very heavily beer influenced and kind of taste like beer a little bit. It includes mesquite smoked single malt from Santa Fe Spirits in New Mexico, a little bit of peated single malt from Balcones in Texas. So really capturing the
and some wine cask aged from Virginia Distillery Company. So you're also getting some of that on the palate. So just a few flavors.
So when you have 6 distillers in a room and you're trying to come up with a blend, like how do you even do this? Like, I mean, And do any of them get like a little bit like, no, you need a little bit more of my spirit in the blend?
Funny, we were worried about the egos, and that actually didn't come into play. I think people were just so excited because it wasn't their product, so they didn't have the weight
The pressure
of
yeah.
having it under their brand name. Also, the great thing about bringing 6 distillers together is they brought casks that we would have never gotten otherwise because they were showing off. They wanted everyone else to be so impressed by the whiskey they brought to the table. And what we started with is everyone made their own blend and played with it. And the only requirement is there had to be whiskey from each distillery in the blend. And then we all tasted it together and we picked our favorites and tweaked from there.
Okay.
It was interesting because there were 2 very clear winners after the first stage. One that tasted a lot like Scotch and one that tasted like
A lot like this.
Which has about half of it is new oak aged versus the Scotch style one was a lot more used cooperage. And we ended up saying we don't want it to taste like Scotch. We want it to taste American. If we're making a statement about where American single malt is now, having some of that vanilla and caramel, and I'm talking about flavors, come into that conversation. We made that call. Yeah. And people let us make that call, and then we tweaked and we figured out, we proofed down to 105 and figured it out together. But we were very pleasantly surprised and downright relieved that egos were really.
Who had the winning blend in the first round?
So that's a good excuse to go over the distilleries.
Yeah.
So the 6 distilleries are Copperworks in Seattle, Washington, which is small, pretty much only available in that state. Westward in Portland, Oregon, which is available nationally. Santa Fe Spirits in New Mexico, which is some distribution. Balcones in Texas, which is nationally available. Virginia Distillery Company in Virginia, and AAA on Massachusetts, which is only available in Nantucket, basically. And the winner was Christian Krogstad, the head distiller and blender at Westward in Oregon.
Okay.
No one has ever actually asked us that before. So
and
we're always happy to talk about it, but no one asks.
But the miraculous thing it was 2 barrels for each distillery. The odds of that happening, we didn't say you have to use full size barrels. We were like, do whatever you want. And for us,
easier
from a logistical perspective, which is my area, like the idea of having to blend full barrels was like, okay, we can do this now. So yeah.
So this was and remains one of the very first blends of American single malt that have ever been created. We look forward to the day when there are many more, because there are many different styles and ways these whiskeys can be brought together over time. But really, it was our way of saying, hey, people should bring this Scottish tradition to the US, and we're going to get started on that.
So this is your first Vatted blend?
Yeah, this was our first release. This originally came out in 2020. One of the nice things about 2 barrels from each distillery was that it's the biggest release we've done so far, which is why we still have some. But yeah, this is our original.
And this is the only one that's not at least close to cast strength. This is 105.
105 proof, so still pretty strong.
This is the lowest that we've ever gotten with a blend. Yeah.
I mean, it's very well flavored. I mean, for being 52.5%, it's fairly hot. But it's got so much flavor. I mean, so many different components. That's delicious.
Yeah.
Our general preference for most things is to do cast strength, because we figure kind of people we're talking to, whiskey lovers we're talking to, maybe they prefer the cast strength, maybe they don't, but they know which way they prefer it. And it's pretty easy to add water if you want it, pretty hard to take it out if you don't.
Yeah.
For this, we made an exception because we were combining whiskey from very, very different distilleries, very different styles. And at cast strength, it tasted a little jagged. The flavors were kind of contrasting with each other. So we slow proofed it down with water for about 4 months. And that helped the flavors slowly integrate and come together into a contiguous whole, which is really what we wanted.
I mean, if I was tasting this for Advent calendar, which means blind, I would have put the alcohol content higher. So I would put it up around 58, 59.
Just you wait.
We don't have our 149 proof whiskey here.
137.
A couple questions. Yeah.
So just a general question, and I've been trying to get my head around this for a few years, and because we're pretty much on this different. But do you find that distilleries are quite happy to have their distillery name on the bottle of the blend versus some that would prefer not? Like, what have you encountered?
So the question was, do we generally find that distilleries are happy to let us use their name on the bottle or not? And this was actually one of our big questions when we went on our road trip. It's like, there's some people who are at us, they would sell us whiskey. I didn't know if they would let us use their name. And it pretty quickly became clear that they really wanted us to, because so many of these distilleries are quite small, or even if they have national distribution, they still have like relatively limited exposure. They're relatively new, they don't have that much name recognition. And this is just a way to get it in front of different people or in a different way and to try something slightly unusual. So it quickly became clear that everyone was going to require us to use their name on the label, which we wanted to anyway. And we were very happy about that. And now we're at the first year or two, there were some people that wanted to see kind of how things went with us, whether we'd be able to launch this before they would sell us whiskey. At this point, we're at the spot now where we've worked with a lot of the places that were on our short list from the beginning that we always knew we wanted to work with, places like Balcones and St. George Spirits in California, and are regularly getting people approaching us and asking, hey, can we sell you some casks and be part of the law sanction program? Because we see this as a way to get our name out there in front of different people.
And
To which our response is, sure, but I have to come out and visit.
Yeah.
So what you're saying is suggesting is the maturity of the industry in the US versus other parts of the world kind of dictate that people are interested in it and using the name. There's a lot of visibility.
So yeah, I think also no one had ever asked most of these places. So I think that because the tradition in the US is more of a blending house approach where it's about the bringing the flavors together and not about the underlying whiskey. And they came mostly from the big brands in Kentucky and Indiana and Tennessee, which don't necessarily want to be associated and are worried about their name brand being hindered by it. But a lot of these small distilleries aren't worried about that because they don't have brand recognition. We also give everyone an opt-out. So when we initially talk to people, we say like, hey, you don't like the end product. We don't want to hurt these relationships. They can tell us they don't want us to use their name, and they know that they have that protection. It's never happened. It probably will eventually, if it just doesn't fit with what they're hoping to see out there. But generally, people are like, yeah, you want to tell people we're awesome? By all means, put this on the bottle.
But also, I think probably speaks a lot to your reputation in the industry for both of you, because if they had doubts about what you're trying to do, they wouldn't want to necessarily put the name on there unless they knew it was going to be good.
Yeah. And I think
there are some places that we've worked with that are not independently owned anymore, that are owned by bigger companies like Westland and Seattle, where we have worked with them, but it took a little longer because we had to have the reputation that they could then go bring it up to the corporate people in France or in the UK or wherever it was, and say like, hey, these people know what they're doing, and working all these other places, it's fine. And this is a way to add value.
There was a certain subset of people that were just so excited to have an independent bottler coming to the US and wanting to do it there, like about Balcones. They were like, yes, we will do it. We also knew him before, and so they were willing to do it. But now I think, at least so far, we've earned the respect and the name recognition that people feel like it's a good thing to be part of our line.
You started getting a lot of great press very early on, too. I'm trying to recall where I first heard about your companies at the Times.
Yeah, we had a New York Times feature profile about us about 5 months after we launched, which was great. Because
expected, but
we're still waiting for our New York Times first fill spirits. 2 years, like
bottler, Caledonia Spirits, which makes Far-Flung Gin, keeps saying that. He's like, I've been doing this for like 15 years.
That's the nice thing about this existing in Scotland. And also, we've heard so many times over from distilleries and journalists kind of talking in the way that we were talking, where they've been waiting for this. And so they already understand, and it helps with the press where they're like, finally, I can write about this. I've been waiting.
Who wrote that?
Clay Rising.
And especially with single malts, American single malts, like any help to raise that tide is probably very, very welcome.
It also doesn't hurt that there are maybe like 20 to 30 full-time whiskey journalists around the country, and I have been one of them, so I know most of them, and also kind of know how to frame things in a way that gets people interested in it. We're doing something different. We're not saying we're the 2,345th distillery to open in the United States. We're saying we're the first independent bottler that is fully committed to American whiskey, and that's a different kind of story. Awesome. Any other questions about the Vatted malt, or should we move along to the next one?
Okay.
Yeah.
So you mentioned you got a lot of really interesting barrels that came out. You guys get just the one scent from everybody? You got all of your releases are limited releases, or you got like contracts going with any of these guys?
So the question was, are all of our releases kind of one and done, or do we set up contracts with places?
So we don't set up contracts. Initially, it was because we wanted to see how things sold. And now it's just we're learning what still we know things are going to sell, and now it's building the volume and figuring out who has the right fit for what we're doing over time. So we buy in smaller lots. So it's this happened to be ones where we bought those 2 casks and moved on, but we generally buy 4 casks, and we have 1 to 2 of those earmarked for single casks and 1 to 2 of those earmarked for blends, because we're doing, unlike this American Vatted Malt, we're now doing a lot of the blending, just the 2 of us, and so having that stock will help us over time build the profile that you see in the Far-Flung Bourbon, which we'll do later.
Awesome.
Okay,
Gentle
Giant.
Gentle Giant.
So
No, they're
Cal really likes this one. It's my favorite thing we've put out so far. So.
You got some good press on this one too.
Yes. This also one, yeah.
No spoilers.
Okay, I was really with it.
Well, no.
Who here has had whiskey from Balcones before? Balcones?
From in Texas.
In Texas. For those of you that have had whiskey from them, what is one word that you would use to describe?
Big.
Like big, in your face, bold,
Earthy.
yes.
Tires.
Yes. Yeah, I also think asphalt. Yes. So this is the first of our single distillery series releases that you all are going to taste. And for us, these are whiskeys that they're small blends that we make from the distillery stock that highlights the side of that distillery that people don't see. We get to see it because we're picking through the barrels with them in their barrel warehouse, but it generally isn't shown in what people get out in the world. So we went to Balcones and we said, what happens if we make a delicate whiskey? What happens if we make something that feels elegant and light and not at all like asphalt and big bold? And we love it, but we know that they have this other side to them that the world doesn't get to see. So hence the name Gentle Giant. And this is the result of us going down and having that process with them.
The proof of this one, I forget. So this is a little stronger than the Vatted Malt, not much. This is about 114 proof.
57.6.
And this is a combination primarily of whiskey that was aged in used casks and a little bit that was aged in former apple brandy casks. So if you get a sustained fruit out on it, that is why.
Yeah. And this is an American single malt. I don't know if we mentioned that, but yes.
So when you're buying these casks, you guys are blending it. You guys are creating a flavor profile, right? So a little of this, a little of that. You're calculating measurements. How much? I don't want to say goes to waste. But how much product do you go through until you get your final results?
So it's just little samples. We do it like with 50 mLs, blending it together with small. With these, we actually do it on site at the distillery. So we walked in and they had 100 samples ready for us. And we played with it until we got to a place where we really liked the profile with them in collaboration, getting feedback from them. They know what we can tweak based off of their stock. And then they dump it for us. And we decide, because for these single distillery series, we actually have them dumped on site, because if we want to proof, which we did very slightly with this, I want to use their water, because Vermont water could make a really big difference in the profile, and we don't want to play with that. For us, it's about the perspective on the distillery.
Vermont water is rare.
But so for this one, after we blended it, it's a good question. After we blended, finally did the blend, they emailed us and said, hey, after dumping all the casks, it doesn't taste like what we did on the, like we call it tabletop blend. And so they said, this is what we recommend that we do to bring it back to profile. And so they sent us a bunch of samples that we tasted, and we ended up adding a half cask from a different barrel. And that's why it's nice to do it collaboratively with them, because they know their stuff so well. And Jared, who's the head distiller there, was able to come in. He wasn't really involved in it, but he was like, I know exactly what you need to add to bring it back to this little sample that you had. We also ended up blending or proofing from, it was like 59.6 to 57.6, because like with the American Vatted Malt, it brought it together and rounded things out a little bit. And we really wanted it to feel, it's still strong, to feel a little bit more gentle.
And one of the things we started talking about a lot is regionality in American whiskey, how whiskey from Texas tastes different than whiskey in the Pacific Northwest and Kentucky and et cetera. But part of that is also like in Scotland, that even whiskey from within one region can be very different from each other. There are islands that are peated and islands that are not peated. And this is true in Texas too. Texas is a big state, the distilleries there do a lot of different things. And this whiskey was our way of saying that Texas whiskey, which is quickly emerging as its own whiskey region, is itself more than one thing. It can be big, bold, and oaky whiskeys. It can also be delicate and elegant whiskeys. And both of those can be great.
And I'll give my tasting notes. They won't. I don't care. I'll influence all of you. With whatever I think. But on this, because having Belcona as kind of their core single malt is it's known for like earth and like sweet, heavy, like mocha, burnt rubber, which is kind of Texas, right? It's their thing. But this, I was just smelling it. It was just strawberry rhubarb pie, creamsicles, grass, peach, fresh strawberries with baking spice, herbal tea. I was like, yeah, blind tasting, no way would you ever say this is a Texas whiskey.
Spot on the strawberry rhubarb pie.
Oh, it's so delicious. Yeah, I drank this one.
You would never know this about puns.
Yeah.
To me, the finish is very Japanese. It has a Japanese tingle that I love so much. But it's sort of, I mean, what's funny about it is they find that's down the middle, but it's surrounded by these still big, bold flavors, but having that elegance just come through down the center and at the end of it. I find this pretty astonishing.
Thank you.
And for us,
Thank you. Yeah.
what we say about this is this actually is similar to some of what Balcones does. It's just the whiskey that they make that is like this doesn't usually make it outside of Texas. Sometimes it doesn't make it outside of Waco. So unless you feel like taking the trip to Waco, you're not going to get to experience this except through this. So we were really excited about that. And for all the single distillery series, it's worth mentioning, we do give them a name, Gentle Giant, but it still says the distillery name right on it. So hard to see from there. It says Balcones Distilling right under it. There's a custom illustration of local Waco features here under it.
We had to work pretty hard on that one. Something like other places.
Waco features.
Not what, and it's worth noting, so this won Best American Single Malt at San Francisco World Spirits Competition recently. Super excited.
That's a big deal.
Yeah.
Big deal.
Yeah.
And
Which is,
didn't Balcones get a little like what's going on here?
It's a little awkward,
Right.
but when we're like
Because theirs was in the running, right?
it was a different award show where we got Best American Single Malt under 12 years for this. We beat them. And this one they didn't make it to the finalists, which actually made it less awkward. But
it helps.
it's terrifying. It's terrifying. Yeah. It's not on the spot.
So it's their whiskey, and they were involved. And the nice thing is, Jared, the head distiller there, has been saying for years that he can't wait for an independent bottler to start beating all the distilleries. Like that happens in Scotland all of the time. We also, when they're blending lots of 30, 40, 50 casks at the same time. We get to come in and cherry pick 4.5 barrels and pick the best things and spend 2 days agonizing over how they fit together. And they're just like, I mean, it's miraculous to me that whiskey is made that way, how quickly people dump. And we're so like focused on the tiniest little nuances. So I think in some ways it's not really fair comparison, but
we have the luxury of small batches and paying close attention to the minutia rather than like having hit a deadline and this must be out by X date.
And they have a huge blending team and they care a lot about, to be clear, we're not saying that they're just like dumping things in, but it's a different scale, and being able to agonize about whether or not you're adding a quarter of a barrel versus a half of a barrel just isn't something that they're able to look at.
Good question. So when you go to a distillery and you get 2 barrels, do you use all the barrels, or do you save half a barrel for maybe something else a couple years down the road? Because you know the flavor of it now, and you say, oh, well, that could be, or do you get extra? Because that's what they do. A lot of the distilleries, the guys in London, they buy extra, and then they start the bottlers. They make. Are you accumulating the warehouse for that for 10 years down the road?
Yeah, so the question is, do we have whiskey left over? Are we accumulating partial casks or just other things? And the answer is yes. We're actually in the process now of having our own warehouse in Vermont where we're able to do storage. Yes, sometimes we use half casks and we have half a cask left over. And for some of these, we know that we'll probably use it in the next batch. And then other times we release it as a really tiny single cask because it's really interesting as a side-by-side with the blend that we're putting.
Sometimes it's your own personal house whiskey.
Yeah.
We have a weird knack that we discovered for accidentally buying a distillery's favorite cask.
Oh, no.
Yeah, like it's the kind of thing like we go there, the distiller is showing us a bunch of like cool normal things, and then we're like, okay, well, what are the other cool things you have that you don't show to everybody? And then they end up showing us some of their favorite things. And then those, of course, end up being our favorite too. And sometimes we end up getting by those. And then it happened with a cask we did from Cedar Ridge, which is a distillery in Iowa. It was a single malt with it's a family-owned distillery. The head distiller is the son. The owner is his parents. And the head distiller showed us his favorite cask, and didn't tell us it was his favorite cask. And when he went to his dad, who is an accountant and runs the company, and said, "Really like this one." He's like, "Sure, that's great. We'll take that." The son.
They kept a little bit of that cask because.
And that ended up winning best finished whiskey last year in San Francisco. So the distiller was very happy about that.
Good name recognition for them, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So there's great whiskey coming from Iowa. We don't have any tonight, but
yeah,
we'll know for the future. Any other questions about Gentle Giant before we switch tacks for a moment and go into bourbon?
And just so you know, on Gentle Giant, because it won, American Single Malt of the Year, it's probably going to be gone pretty quick. So we did check with Adam today if more was available, because we only have a few bottles left here, but we can get some more, but we're going to do like a pre-sale for what we order in if people want more of that, but it's going to go probably pretty quick. So just FYI, we can talk more about that after the tasting. Yeah. So
before we switch things, one fun thing I forgot to mention earlier is that is somewhat irrelevant to the rest of this, is that I'm actually relatively local here. I grew up in Albany. So for any of you who have been here from here for a long time, went to Hill Park High School. So local boy, make good kind of.
We have a dope office, right?
No,
we're gonna skip. We're in
smoke is hard.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, we're
going a little out of order.
Out of order.
Yeah,
Can you mention that in the chat too?
Yeah.
we've been trying to tell people exactly. Yeah, we went rogue because the smoke.
Should have thought of that.
The Mickey,
And
that's why we.
Oh, Soaring spice.
Soaring spice.
that's cool. Tasting.
Right, so top middle.
And then open up. Yeah.
So how many of you have heard of Flavor Distillery? Have you tasted their whiskey? Okay.
So Ray Ranch is one of the distilleries that we are most excited about in the whole country, because there are many distilleries that try to work local, source grain as locally as they can, malted locally if they can, but very few have been able to do it at the scale of Ray Ranch and as local as they do, because they are a family farm in northern Nevada, which is a place where you actually can farm, believe it or not. And they have a 1,500 acre family farm. The Frey family has been in this area for over 150 years, since Nevada was a territory. And they grow all of the grain for all of their whiskeys themselves on site at their farm. They malt their barley locally, they distill it on site, of course, age it on site. Basically, nothing ever leaves the site until it's fully bottled and ready to leave there. So there is no other distillery that we know of at this size in the United States doing that. And they're not huge, but they are fairly big for a craft distillery. And that to us means that this is a whiskey that truly reflects the landscape of that particular place of northern Nevada in the watershed of Lake Tahoe and the Sierra Nevadas.
And that's not common anywhere.
No, it's not
And
common.
we went in June, we visited Lockleigh Distillery, which is doing that same thing, growing their own barley and it's just a process.
Doing it all the way. When they say grain to glass, they mean grain to glass in that spot. Yeah.
First distillery in Nevada after Prohibition, have been growing, corn and soybeans and alfalfa for many years and selling it off to far away. And we're like, what if we actually made something with it right here instead? So this whiskey, which is called Soaring Spice, is a new entry in our single distillery series.
That comes out next week.
And for us, when we went out to Prairie Ranch, which is an hour and a half outside of Reno, we wanted to work with their whiskey to blend something that would be, we would hope be really appealing both to people who love Prairie Ranch and to people who are not familiar with whiskey from outside of Kentucky. Yeah. So we put together a blend that we thought was very big and spice forward. And I won't say anything about tasting notes beyond that.
Can you say what they're normally known for?
Yeah,
Style.
It's a relatively earthy style normally, which makes sense when it's all grown right there. Earthy, a lot of like black cherry to it normally. And this still tastes like Prairie Ranch, but a little more towards the baking spice side. And the fun thing about them for us, and one reason we're really excited to work with them, is most of you have not heard of them yet. They are a cult distillery on the West Coast now. Like in San Francisco, every time a single barrel from them comes out, it sells out in half an hour. And they basically don't sell that much outside of California, Nevada, because they don't need to yet. Everyone over there is clamoring for it, and then no one on the East Coast has heard of it yet. That is part of the fun for us, so that we can bring these distilleries that are really well known in their area to somewhere else to introduce people who don't necessarily have access to it otherwise.
We have a lot of FOMO over Prairie Ranch here.
So I'm sure you've heard of it.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I mean, you see it all over, especially the California people we know. They're like, oh, this is the best thing since sliced bread. And they're like, oh, yeah, taste it here.
Now you've got it on the shelves.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
We're gonna pull it because we don't have a bottle.
Is this, I was just gonna ask, is this high rise?
it's a 4 grain.
I have it. So 66% corn, 11% rye, 12% malted barley, 10% wheat.
Is that their classic?
Yeah, so we pulled from their very standard mash bill. We just pulled barrels that were very baking spice forward because we wanted to show this is like with the Gentle Giant. These are barrels that we've been tasting from them, but we don't get from their bottled product.
Is this cask proof?
Yeah.
This is cask, yeah.
So what number would that be?
This is 127 proof. So bit of a jump up. Should have warned people.
My first taste, I said it like Szechuan peppercorn. My mouth was numb.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I find it not as hot as some of the earlier ones.
That's a clue. I think partly because you get used to it.
That's probably
One more.
When I went back to the Gentle Giant, it was way more gentle.
Yeah. That's a bourbon.
Yeah.
So they're able to grow barley in northern Nevada.
Yeah, and they actually malt it there too.
Yeah.
So
We had no idea.
They malted on site.
So this is part of the reason that we visit everywhere that we work in is you tell me as someone from upstate New York that they grow all the grains in Nevada. I'm like, how can they do that? It's the desert. But this particular part of Nevada is not like that. It's very flat. But it's like Sierra Nevadas are visible right in the distance.
Interesting.
And it's Tahoe watershed.
Yeah, there's a lot of groundwater there. Not a lot of rain, but natural groundwater that
I
reflects.
spent a lot of time in Reno.
Yeah.
I grew up in San Francisco, so we would go to Tahoe.
A lot of time in Reno in the last 2 years, much more than we ever.
So how close to Reno is it? It's
Like
An hour and a half.
okay, yeah.
So that's.
Yeah.
Because I'm just curious, what is it that brings that spice forward that he was talking about? I mean, well,
Yeah, I mean,
identified or no?
yes and no. I mean, it's all the same mash bill.
Right.
I think it's usually going to be a combination of the specific cask because every barrel is different.
Right.
They have a few brick houses and the placement. So we found that things that are coming from higher up seem to have a little more spice.
How big are their rick houses? Like Kentucky style rick houses?
It's like 1 to 2 floors.
Right.
Yeah. But it gets so hot. We were there in the summer and we walked in to one of the warehouses and it hurts your entire face. There was so much alcohol vapor in the air that it gets.
Could not breathe.
I was like, I'm out. I'm gonna get drunk. Like I'm the DD. I have to get out of this warehouse. So yeah, but a lot of it is. No one really knows always what things. Yeah, that's why. But for us, it's just picking.
Like, and you can taste the wheat. Like the mouthfeel with that little bit of heat, extra multiplied with the chai, heavy, thick chai.
You said all 4 grains that are used in this, they're growing themselves.
Growing and malting it themselves.
Bourbons that they're primarily corn based and everything.
Yeah.
Corn is grown on the creek. They grow their own corn. I don't know about their rye, they got all their rye.
So I don't know if it's all there on Street. I mean, they do the Bloody Butcher. I don't know if they had other spots.
Or even other.
There's well, there's starting
But to do all 4 strains, all 3 grains, and like for really anything, the malting of the barley.
Yeah, that's where Scotland, like Jackville, that's where it's all like malt goes on.
Oh, yeah,
Oh, no.
Well, same. Anybody have questions on that one? In the back? Anybody? I think the proof, loosening it up.
It's a bourbon and single malt drinker, so I'd be curious to see where we fall at the end of, we're like in the bourbon.
All fall.
Yeah, hopefully no one is driving or is being careful if they are.
We're gonna go up and proof one more time, and then let's.
So now we're going to Far-Flung.
Yeah, next. Far-Flung Bourbon. Upper. So. And is our second multi-distillery blend that we've ever done. This is also upcoming. It's a blend of straight bourbons from 4 distilleries. Watershed in Ohio, Boulder Spirits in Colorado. What else?
Still Austin in Texas.
Thank you.
And of course, Ray.
Yeah. He's the one that usually rattles off everything. I get shown his box. It is a blend that we made, just the 2 of us. So these are barrels, unlike the American Vatted malt, these are barrels that we sourced and brought together and then tinkered for many months to figure out what we wanted to do with this. This is 68.4%, the highest.
Very, very strong.
So the highest fruit in the shop is, well, we have ABV of 68.1. So this is higher than anything in the shop.
This is not, therefore, this is not in the shop.
Not yet.
Next week. We will pre-sell.
No, go ahead.
What's the 68.1?
It's the Octanium, the 15-year light whiskey.
It's right there, actually, next to you.
Right behind you.
The light whiskey. Next to Nulu. Right in the middle.
So if
it is definitely and then yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah.
This is the highest. All right, hold on, guys. Hold on, we gotta hear.
That's really not like me.
So
Maybe it is.
the goal for us with this one is to show a different side of bourbon. These are distilleries that have never been put together in a blend. It's not the classic Kentucky, Tennessee, Indiana blends. These are places that are making really wonderful bourbon that's a little bit more off the beaten path and we think add to the conversation. The reason that, for example, the reason this is such high proof whiskey is because the Boulder Spirits component of it was half that, so above 140 proof. Because they're in Boulder and because it's so high altitude, the amount of evaporation that they get of the water means that it gets crazy high proof. And we actually have done some bourbon with them that is hazmat, but it's like crazy dense in a way that you just don't get from lower altitude whiskeys. And it's a really interesting thing to blend that with whiskey from Ohio, which is a creamier style of whiskey, and they can really play well together. This is actually cap strength. We didn't have to add water. We find that bourbon plays well together in a way that single malt doesn't always. But it once again, like the American Vatted malt, we're trying to show the landscape of what's out there right now in a new and unique way that you wouldn't see otherwise.
So, quick question. Yeah. So Boulder, entry proof 125.
Yeah. And
it goes up over 140 just because of the altitude?
Yeah, because of the evaporation at that altitude. We really just peated single malt. Yeah.
Laws is the same too, like all of that.
It's crazy. We released a peated single malt single cask from them last year. That was 149 proof.
Wow.
Which was crazy. Peated single malt.
How about maple share?
Which one is technically classified as an explosive?
Can't bring it on the place. Yeah.
That changes the insurance policy of the stock.
Inventory.
And it keeps opening up, which normally in the urban world, I don't say that a lot. Time, you know, that's a single moment, but it keeps opening up.
One of the messages we're saying, especially with our bourbon release that's coming out next week, is that great bourbon comes from all across the United States. Yes. Great bourbon comes from Kentucky, of course, but it also comes from many other places. This whiskey is our ultimately a single. It's bringing whiskeys from many different places together.
So the mash bills are all different.
All different. Obviously. The Prey is a 4 grain. The Watershed from Ohio is a 5 grain with spelt. The Still Austin is a high rye bourbon. And the Boulder is probably the most unusual, is an extremely high malt bourbon. It's 51% corn, 44% malt, 5%.
You'll see on our label once it gets here, it's a blend of straight whiskeys. And that's because they're from different states. So, So for this, and it always says all of the names of the distilleries on the front and back, because that's part of what's interesting is the fact that this is from such a range of places.
Don't get a snack.
Yeah.
One thing that's been conspicuously absent in the discussion has been age. Have any comments on the ages of these whiskeys?
So this one is on the label, it's 3, but it ranges from 3 to 7 years. And we like to say we're age agnostic because the maturation conditions in the United States vary so widely. And for us, we do as much as possible blind. So we'll taste whiskey from a distillery that's 2 years old and 6 years old and sometimes 9 years old. And we don't want to know that because what we're looking for is maturity. And does this taste like it's ready to be consumed? So American whiskey is younger than Scottish whiskey, especially like the Gentle Giant, which is in Texas. It matures so much more quickly. It extracts from the oak flavors so much more quickly. We actually see Texas distilleries now moving out of 53-gallon barrels into 60-gallon barrels and 65-gallon barrels because they're trying to be able to age for longer, because some of the process that you get from a more mature Scotch, where it's all about interaction with oxygen, isn't possible in certain climates in the US because the oak becomes so overwhelming by the time you start getting But for us, we're looking for balance. We've actually recently, the last one, we're not going to say anything about the last one, the age of the last one.
So essentially,
yeah.
You just like you can't tell flavor quality with the color of a whiskey.
Yeah.
You can't tell flavor quality by age either.
Right. So we rarely lead with the age. We'll tell you the age of everything, including every component. Like the American Vatted Malt ranges from 2 to 7, Gentle Giant is 3, Soaring Spice is 4. This is 3 to 7. The Still Austin is 3 years old. The Ohio is 7, and the rest is in between.
And Boulder is 6. Yeah.
So it's no secret. It's just we usually don't lead with it. Honestly, just not even because we want to keep it a secret, it's because there's so many other things to talk about.
We also think it doesn't tell you much, and people often have, because so many people start from Scotch and understand age in the context of Scotch, it will actually lead you down a road that we think doesn't lead to anywhere that makes sense with the type of American whiskey that's playing it.
So outside of Bray Ranch, which seems to be a popular one, Still Austin, you've mentioned. What are the distilleries right now that you're working with that probably have the most buzz or excitement behind them besides Bray Ranch? I mean, obviously,
I think Starlight in Indiana,
Starlight,
is also not as grand a glass as Bray Ranch is, but also a multi-100-year-old farming operation, family company.
So from a flavor standpoint as well, or just from a authenticity?
No, flavor as well.
Okay.
I think it's a little softer than a lot of Kentucky bourbon, which is just they're 20 minutes from Louisville. They're closer to Louisville than Buffalo Trace is. But Wild Turkey.
Yeah. So them Iron Republic in Texas, which is only in Texas because they're really experimenting with corn varieties, and Iron Republic in Texas.
Okay. They're experimenting with corn
varieties. So they generally do bourbon that's 100% corn, and instead of doing corn and rye wheat or corn and rye corn and rye and barley, or corn and wheat and barley, they're doing one style of corn and 2 other styles of corn that provide those texture flavors. And they're also playing with European oak and Hungarian oak. And they have a crazy following in Texas.
Are they using Mexican varietals as well?
Yeah.
Where in Texas are they?
They're really close to the Oklahoma border.
It's in Denison, Texas, like an hour north of Dallas, near Lake Texoma.
In tornado country.
Yeah.
It's fun to try to get barrels from them.
Very low.
So stoutly underground. So still, what about Still Austin? Are they like the real player that should be?
They feel like they're a rising star in Texas that I think put a barrel 5 years from now, everyone who's really serious about bourbon will know Still Austin. Okay. And right now they're only Texas, basically.
A lot of bartenders are just about them in Texas.
Yeah.
So you're tasting whiskey and you say, "Oh, we're no longer in the
Let's get out of here.
But I think Still Austin is also interesting because they're a much gentler style of Texas whiskey. They are great for cocktails. Like, it's not so tannic. They do some really interesting fruiting, which makes it we actually have one for you two to try of a single cast that we have here Still Austin.
So Starlight, they must be getting a lot of buzz off the boys.
So
From Indiana, no less.
The head distiller at Starlight Distillery in Indiana has been distilling for 13 or 14 years now. He which is the longer tenure than most craft distillers have even been open. And that's fun because he's about 27. He started distilling when he was 13 years old, which is allowed in Indiana.
Hypothesized is because his dad had a law change.
Well,
We don't know that.
It's like, why else they are that age?
It is job. It's me.
That's awesome.
Trying to say something?
We're gonna talk about the last whiskey here. Oh, questions first.
Between the two bourbons, who preferred the first one?
Oh, boy, that's
Try more, I don't know.
Bourbons?
Second bourbon, so Far-Flung. Where it's almost equally split, which is not always true in these kind of tastes.
Yeah.
Okay, now we will move to the last whiskey called Desert Dessert, which is totally different. It's down in proof, up in smoke.
Yeah.
Who here has had whiskey Delbach whiskeys? You got, yeah. Do you want to talk about them or do you want me to? So, whiskey Delbach is out of Tucson. What is really interesting about what they do? So they make American single malt, but they actually make mesquite smoked single malt in the same way that in Scotland, or I guess everywhere, people make peated malt. So they use mesquite wood to malt the barley.
Locally harvested mesquite, cast iron smoker outside.
I wasn't done, but so Stephen Paul, the founder there, was a mesquite wood furniture maker. So he actually spent a lot of his life around mesquite wood. So one night, his wife turned to him, they were drinking LaCroix, burning some mesquite wood, and said, why don't people do this with mesquite? And she tells us he regrets that every day. But it's one of the most exciting styles for us in the US. Because it's an American style that's emerging and really unique and taking a tradition and adding an American.
So this is mesquite and not like.
So it's mesquite smoked single malt. Do you want to talk about Desert Dessert and the history there?
Yeah. So this whiskey is called Desert Dessert, and we named it that because this is a blend of several different casks that were finished, and this was finished in a combination of casks, including French Sauterne casks and Pinot de Chirac. So both French dessert wines, and we think that these add this rich. Here it talks about tasting notes again, but add a rich golden fruit flavor and a lot of sweetness to it that wouldn't be there otherwise. We think bring it together in an interesting way. There are a lot of great scotches that are finished in Sauterne, a few in Pinot de Chirac, and this is such a fun American single malt take on this traditional style. With the mesquite smoke is very different from
very nice.
So back to the age question. How old do you think this whiskey is?
18. I'm gonna say young because it's smoked.
I was 1 year old.
So it's 1 year old. Which I don't think that was pretty good. Most people don't get that, but it's usually people think it's around 3. But the Arizona heat, it's in 15. A lot of their stuff is in 15-gallon casks. They're actually one of the few distilleries that we work that are in small casks. We think that they figured it out. Yeah, but Tucson, I mean, the temperature shifts there is just absolutely insane. And some of this was in larger casks. Anything that was in a finishing cask was in a much larger cask for a period of its life. But I think they have found a way to create a depth of flavor in a smaller cask in a short amount of time.
So this is very normal kind of but core. Yeah. You call it core. I think it's just
the seasonal.
I think this is kind of blood orange barbecue note of all of their stuff, which I really like.
I do too, and we get that exactly.
Yes, like sweet barbecue sauce with blood orange fruit punch. And maybe from the wine and all of that, but you get it in their whatever this core release is. This is Spanish cherry. and Calvin.
That was really good.
Is that
That's Spanish here.
So
just like in the Scotch world, these are distillery releases or OBs, we would call them, original bottlings. So the distillery released these. And then what we're tasting is a special independent, an IB release.
This is 56.9.
Did you say? Finish?
These are.
So, 12 months. When is the finish?
Perfect.
What's the age of the finish?
Yeah.
Your house.
The way that age statements work is youngest whiskey in a blend is the age statement that goes on there. So that's why, for example, with Far-Flung Bourbon, it's 3 to 7 years, but you'll see on our label 3 years.
So this is from 1 to how many years?
And everyone says.
1 to 1.5.
1 to 2 years.
That's gonna be great for that bottom line.
It helps.
Yeah.
But
You balance out with having much smaller volume versus the.
This might be a silly question, but is it a whole or a hot smoke? Like,
it's hot smoke, so they have a cast iron smoker outside the store. They're low. This thing would set it on fire. And that like the hot smoke.
oh, so it's passing over.
Here,
The way-
That's all done at the very beginning.
You can get to that.
and then this part of it. And then, wow, you do the Zoom, they'll send you.
None of the smoke comes from the end of the
It's all early on.
all right before the clear.
Yeah, last month we had.
It gets infused right at the time, right? Okay.
And this is what we love about whiskey is this is a climate that's so totally different than you would ever see in Scotland. Right now, I looked it up.
Hey guys, love it. No, we just want to listen to different stuff.
I'm saying that.
Probably trying to set this home.
But this is what we love about American whiskey is that the climates are so different than you get in Scotland. I just looked it up right now. It's 113 degrees in Tucson. It gets down to a nice low of 85 tonight. And it's going to be like that for the next like 30 days in a row. But that's actually like a pretty big temperature swing from day to night of 30, sometimes more degrees than that in the winter. And that encourages a lot of interaction between the whiskey and the barrel over the course of the day and the year.
And that's hotter than Scotland gets.
This past year.
Scotland then right after. But it's still that is hotter. But that's also when we talk about maturation, whiskey interacting with a barrel at that heat is just gonna mature, or at least not fully mature, but it goes through that oak extraction process.
Yeah.
Oh my god.
So next year's bottling is gonna be 1 month.
They just like put on a carousel movie, yeah, with shade. Keep it like. Let's stay with us. July. How about manufacturing that? Figure it out.
I like it. Any other questions about this whiskey? Anything that's come to mind about other things?
For the smaller barrels, what are your thoughts on that? 'Cause it's kind of a hot topic still in bourbon. For the smaller tasks, yeah.
Like we say that we're age agnostic, we're barrel size agnostic in theory. In practice, 90% of the time, we think whiskey aged in full size barrels, 53 gallons or larger, is almost always much better. Whiskey Del Lac is the only small barrel distillery we've released whiskey from yet. We bought a few others from a few other places, but it's something like the unique interaction with the climate and the mesquite smoke there, we think makes it.
He'll very often bring small barrels samples back from a distillery visit, and he'll blind me on it and see if I can tell. And if I can tell, we generally don't work with them. If I can't tell, then they pass through and we probably start a sourcing project with them. So because if I can taste it, it'll probably come out over the process.
So, but Del Lac probably gonna do larger barrels too, right?
They're
And-
working on it. But it becomes this kind of thing that you're stuck in, because if you move up over time, there'll be a gap
Yeah.
in production. So they're doing it very slowly. But yes, yes, they're
Although for us as an independent bottler, it's logistically challenging to work with smaller barrels because we're buying the barrels from Arizona and moving them to Vermont. And if it's all a bunch of 15-gallon barrels, that need to buy a lot of them for it to make sense. And for Whiskey Del Bach, we do it because we really love their whiskey. But yeah. It's usually for us is a good reason if we're on the fence about a place and it's smaller barrels. It's just much easier to do full size.
that's a 30-gallon barrel for
Half
reference.
of that.
Just as yeah.
Small.
Are they small for first fill, or are they,
No. What we
Everything's for first fill.
most of what they do is for fill. We have done some stuff with them. I think one of these is used, but they do a range. But most of what they do is.
So when you do a single cask, is it literally just a single cask of theirs that you would admired and just put out?
Yeah. So
how many bottles?
depends.
No, but if, say from that would be not very many.
No, for them it's like
Yeah.
50, 60 bottles, and normally in a full size barrel it's somewhere between 150 and 250 barrels, depending on the people share. And for us, I mean, with single casks, what we look for there is also like the single distillery series is a unique perspective on something, like a finish that we would never know to ask for, a mash bill that they've done that isn't released normally or is part of a blend, but you don't taste it by itself. And we never pick on site. That's something that's different from us versus a lot of private barrels, because I'm sure most of you have been to a distillery visit and you get carried away and you hear all about the story and it's amazing, and we get carried away and then we bring it back and we're like, well, it's clearly these two. Once we do our tastings, and we do a pretty intensive process, we both have to say yes to every barrel that we pick. And our palates are quite different. So that is a process that can take a long time, up to a couple of weeks sometimes. And it's a luxury.
Tell me about your palates. That's the phenomenal ability to have taste. So what's the difference between your palates?
I'd say it starts that. I would say that it starts that I came into the industry from whiskey and she came into the industry from wine.
Yeah.
And so I have much more of like I like the big oak flavors of a bourbon or the intense smoke of a peated scotch, like sometimes taken to its extremes.
Yeah.
And
I like more delicate.
Yes.
I'd like to say nuanced. But I do think, yeah, like that's more my flavor profile. But we both like, I love peated whiskey. We release a lot of different things, but we find that the things that we both gravitate towards with very different palates, it gives us some confidence that a wider range of people can enjoy it.
It's a perfect combination.
Yeah, it's definitely sometimes we're both very clear that one barrel in a flight is the best, and they're different barrels. And when that happens, we just keep tasting until we either can't agree or we eventually come to
I would recommend, yeah, and I heard there was a little bit of a dispute about whether it's going to happen or not, but I would recommend going to trying a properly finished wine at some point instead of just a properly finished beers. I think you guys will have a lot of fun with that. I've had a few that they're just aged so well. This club, and Charles turned me on to this one. It's a fantastic place.
Yeah.
In Louisville, you know, people.
Lots
of different varieties within that one place. You know?
Yeah, we love branding. Yeah. Doesn't from a business perspective, it's less compelling right now. It doesn't sell very well. So whiskey is better for us to build name recognition and have people trust what we're doing, and then eventually when we release apple brandy or grape brandy, then people will be more likely to join us.
I was late to the party, so I apologize if you've answered this before, but how long have you guys been in business and what was the genesis of the partnership?
So we launched in 2020. We had started talking about it probably and started laying the real planning for in 2018.
We left for the road trip in 2018.
And we I worked at Whiskey Advocates, she worked at Astor Wine and Spirits in New York, and we went on an 8-month road trip around the country together to visit distilleries all around the US.
We're also married, which helps with.
No, I was looking. I don't know progress. Getting drunk and driving is a great job.
Although now the sad thing is he travels a lot without me now. So I'm back like doing the business, like running the company. I drive the forklift, all of the things. So.
Where's the HQ?
Vermont.
What town?
Virgin. We're actually in the process now of finalizing a tasting room and little barrel storage space. It's very modest, but it'll be really fun to have our own little.
Probably 2 or 3 years started with we wanted so much.
I just trust the name.
The idea that like we should because there are so many independent bottlers. Like there's so many. How many do you have on the shelves here? How many different companies? And why are there none for American whiskey?
We spent a year. I spent a year deep into spreadsheets, making sure that financially this worked, and also that it could work legally. So talking to lawyers, because no one had done this, then put someone's name on the label, and I wanted to make sure that we could even do it. And
So the ones where they weren't involved in the choice or the selection process,
yeah.
were they also just as easy to work with in terms of the output fund? I'm assuming they got a chance to check it before their name went on the bottle.
One of the 4 distilleries asked to take the product before signing up on using their name. And that, for us, that was a huge mark of confidence in what we do. Not expected, but, and then happily, Fort gave.
So which is helpful too. I see there are others. Yeah,
they're not being hard.
I won't tell you what I do for a living, but I have. But
yeah.
So what's the plumbing situation like? Yeah. What do you guys experience?
So we've done really like the startup route. We have. You're talking about.
No,
Funding. Oh, I think said funding.
I think it said funding.
Okay. Fully transparent. Funding.
There's a lot of funding in Vermont right now.
There wasn't any flooding near us, but we work with Caledonia Spirits that makes Bar Hill, and they were in the epicenter of it.
Are they in Barry?
They're in Montpelier.
Montpelier, oh yeah.
So, but they were unstable. It's bad in certain places. There are roads that are still closed.
No, east, western side.
Right on.
No, it might be in this context.
The one was the highest it's been in decades, but it has a flood in the roads.
Maybe one. You can ask about your funding.
Little off the beaten path, not Lost Lantern per se. We're in New York. Have you seen any New York stuff? What's your favorite place in New York to get whiskey or sure. Everything.
Really like New York Distilling Company. Finger Lakes Distilling Company. I thought it's
Like
mostly in the city. There are a lot of places that just have a lot of night.
And I would think that's probably a city location, as opposed to the upstate farm.
Yeah, I'm gonna stop the recording, but before I stop the recording, I just want to say thank you so much for having me. This was really great. Incredible vast array of flavors, obviously. A lot of alcohol, a lot of high fruit, but a really good kind of, perspective on what is happening in the US, right? I mean, it's hard as a consumer to kind of look at the shelf and be like, oh yeah, and you see Kentucky, and a little bit of Tennessee, and a little bit of some other places. A lot of Indiana. But to have a real idea of what else is going on, you said over 2,000 distilleries, you know, there's still more coming on board. Well, I mean, I think we're getting close to a peak. If not, we've peaked already, but it's pretty amazing what time will do as well, because that's where the true players come out, you know, it takes time. So this is really a great experience, especially being able to taste whiskey from places that we can't actually taste in New York State right now.
Yeah, that's pretty
Nevada. I mean, we have a little bit of Del Bach. Those are special releases. Those come out, you know, every year. They have their special releases, but still Austin. All, you know, Watershed, all of these little places that never get to New York.
Right.
So awesome to be able to do that with you guys. And keep going.
Yeah.
You know, we're excited. And keep coming to New York.
It's nice, it's only 2-hour drive here.
Yeah.
Well, no, but I mean, you guys started originally on the West Coast with your products, right? So that's an interesting thing. You know, we hear about California, obviously, as being this massive market, great place to kind of tell if your brand is going to do well or not, right? So you guys started on the West Coast as well. But you're recent into New York State, so this is exciting for us to have them come here.
So question for you, just on that point, right?
Yeah.
So most of the distilleries were central to West Coast. There was only one from the East Coast. So what is the trend on the East Coast with distilleries in American whiskey?
It's a good question. There are a lot. There are, including some that we've worked with that we don't have today. We've done a couple of different ryes from New York State and Pennsylvania, whiskey from New York. I think a lot of the ones out west are a little more mature, and also the climate is just hotter, so sometimes that can leave the whiskey to age differently. In New England, in particular, we find that a lot of the whiskey it takes a long time. Like you just tasted some 3-year-old whiskey that hopefully you enjoyed, and we've had 5 or 6 or 7-year-old New England whiskey that tastes younger than that, because it's frozen to have.
Which is actually sometimes to our benefit, because when we're buying mature casks and it comes to Vermont, it doesn't change. We can wait until we have a project and not worry about it getting over oak. But starting a whiskey from new make, that means that's a long time to get to that same level of maturation, which means that a lot of the distilleries here are doing good things. It's just the whiskey is not at a point that really works for our projects yet.
The states that have the most mature craft distilleries in general often are either Texas, which is its own thing, or they're states that had a lot of craft breweries and a lot of populations, in places like Colorado, the Pacific Northwest, and California. Whereas Vermont has a lot of craft breweries, but it doesn't have a lot of people. So it takes a certain amount of scale and money to make a big distillery. So it takes longer.
And I'm curious, if you don't mind, I'm curious what favorites people have. Can we do hands?
Let's do a quick, let's do hands.
So American Vatted Malt. Anyone's favorite?
Yes.
I like that.
All right.
It's also our oldest whiskey, so I always say we like.
I mean, I like them all.
We like distilleries get better over time, and so for us,
Which one number 6?
Oh, the first game.
Yeah. Yeah.
I like number 6.
You're not offended by any. Gentle Giants.
That was up there.
That was interesting. Strange.
Soaring Spice.
That might be.
Yeah, that's
I like that.
That's my number 5.
What about Far-Flung Bourbon?
Yes.
Voted.
So you did it top 50.
Effective, out in the business.
Last one.